Monsta Creepypasta.
My name is Michael Parks, and when I was a kid, I used to go to camp, and I never missed a summer, because I loved the outdoors and the chance to share a cabin with my friends, and I can still remember all the good memories I had, like sitting around the bonfire listening to ghost stories, shooting bows at targets, and sneaking over to the girls' cabins with my friends to scare them at night. But then I grew up and became a camp counselor, which gave me the opportunity to give all the kids the best summer I could, and I used to take pride in coming up with fun activities for the children to do. But my love for summer camp would unfortunately come to an end one summer that I drove there, thinking that it would be like any other day as a counselor. At least it would have been, if it wasn't for a natural disaster followed by an old campfire legend that came to life. Well, I started my day by driving over to the campground I worked at, where I was greeted by 4 other counselors named Jim, Barrett, Marlene, and Carrie, all people I knew ever since we attended the same camp as children. But upon arriving, we would be the only 4 there, and not even the director, Mr. Bryson, was present like he usually would be. Confused, I called the director, who had been working at this camp for decades, just to be told the most disturbing news someone could ever be told. And that was when he said that a hurricane was touching down close to the camp, and that he sent emails and called everyone to warn them about the threat of the weather a day ago, and that all parents and staff received his warning, and the only ones that didn't answer or respond to him was the 5 of us that then found ourselves at the campground and in the path of danger. And before he hung up, he would say that the 5 of us needed to find a safe place to try and wait out the storm. So I informed the others of the unfortunate situation we found ourselves in which we all agreed and had decided to take shelter in the bunkhouse nearest to us, since we didn't have enough time to drive away. And that's where we would close the shutters, then sit down as the wind began to pound into the cabin, and it was vicious. And fortunate for us, the only thing we would get around us was strong winds and heavy rainfall that lasted for a couple of hours, and by the time it stopped, it was too late for us to drive home, so we all decided to just spend the night and crash in the bunk beds. I don't remember the exact time it was, but I do know that it was late when I was awoken to the sound of the doorknob to the cabin twisting from left to right, indicating that somebody was trying to get inside, and whoever they were, I could hear them slightly groaning out, as if they were in pain or something. So I jumped out of my bed and rushed over to the door, thinking it might have been one of the others that accidentally locked themselves out. But once I opened the door, I would see nothing except muddy boot prints that was all over the deck where someone was walking. So I just shut the door back, making sure to lock it before I did a head count of the other counselors to make sure it wasn't one of them that was lurking around the outside. And once I counted, it would let me know that it might have been the camp director stopping by to check in on us, or possibly a stranger who was there for sinister reasons. And that thought had me wake up my friends to alert them of the weirdness surrounding our late-night visitor. But after me, Jim, and Barrett searched around the camp, we wouldn't see or hear anyone, so we just went back to Marlene and Carrie at the cabin, where Jim would make fun of me for hearing someone groaning outside the door, and said it was just like the creepypasta that surrounded the camp, and was its urban legend, which is a story about a counselor that worked at this very camp back in the 1980s, who was murdered by a serial killer who chose him as his next victim. His name was Charlie Dupree, a 20-year-old who was constantly picked on, and not only by the other counselors, but also by the children, because he had a learning disability, which made him slower at activities than everyone else. Plus, he always wore a gray hooded jacket that he never took off, and in order for Charlie to cope with the constant bullying, he would take nightly walks around the campground by himself. But one night would be his last, and his body would be found the next day, hanging upside down from a tree where he was brutally gutted after being gagged and restrained. After Jim rehashed the legend, an eerie feeling would come over me, like something wicked was about to happen, and that was the second I should have got everybody to leave with me, but instead I would lay back down and fall back asleep. And I don't know how long it was that I was passed out before I was once again awakened by Jim, Marlene, and Carrie, who was acting hysterical while telling me that Barrett was missing and that they found a blood trail leading off towards the center of the campground. Me still being half asleep and a bit confused, would climb out of bed to try and help them find our friend. But as soon as we opened the door, I would see a huge puddle of blood that started on the deck and ran down the steps off towards the direction the others told me it did. And that is what woke me up, plus brought back the bad feeling that I had earlier that night. So I told Marlene and Carrie to remain in the cabin and to lock the door as Jim and I went to my car to retrieve my handgun and a few flashlights before we went looking for Barrett. But my plan didn't work out as I planned it to. I did get my handgun and 2 flashlights, but Jim and I would come across all of our vehicles with destroyed windows and flat tires, which let both of us know that Barrett's disappearance had to have been done with foul play, because whoever the psychopath was that busted up our cars was in fact a dangerous person. So I did what we should have done earlier, and that was pull out my phone and call the authorities to report the disturbing circumstances that was occurring around the campground. But as if our luck had run out, and due to the recent hurricane that previously gone through our community, the operator said that the police wasn't able to make it to us right away, and that they would be at the camp as soon as they could. So the only thing Jim and I could do after hanging up was return to the girls and wait for help to arrive. At least that's what we thought would happen, because we would get about 20 feet away from the bunkhouse before we would hear Marlene and Carrie screaming, which made us quicken our pace until we made it back inside the cabin with them. And it is there that we would be told the most scariest thing my ears could ever pick up. And that's when Carrie, the less shocked out of the two, would tell me and Jim that they seen a zombie wearing a gray hooded jacket standing in front of the porch steps. And they only knew he was there after hearing groaning, which made both her and Marlene think it was Jim and I. So they both opened the door just to see his bloody face staring back at them. And what made her claim even more bizarre was when she went on to say that it was Charlie Dupree, because his face matched the one in the picture on the wall in the director's office. And that's the moment we all got a jump scare, as the door to the bunkhouse began to be pounded on, as someone shouted for us to open up. And it was the camp director, Mr. Bryson, who would walk into the cabin once we let him inside, who said he came to check on us because he was worried about our safety. So Jim and I filled in Mr. Bryson, Marlene, and Carrie about the crazy nut who destroyed our vehicles, as we gave our opinion on what might have happened to Barrett, that he might have been murdered by the same person. And as she slowly stood up with a horrified look upon her face, Carrie would say that it was Charlie who came back from the dead looking for revenge after being murdered. But she would be interrupted by Mr. Bryson, who would threaten us, saying that if we were playing some kind of a sick joke on him, that he would fire us all on the spot. So I would open up the door to show him the huge puddle of then dried blood that trailed off towards the center of the campgrounds, which was something that he must have somehow overlooked. And I also explained to him that Barrett went missing and that we think the blood belongs to him. And as he sat there for a moment glancing over the disgusting substance with a concerned look on his face, he would then utter out the words, "I have a couple of rifles in my truck. Well, get the girls to take it once I get my guns out. Then the 3 of us can go looking for Barrett." And even though I didn't want to stay behind, I went along with Mr. Bryson's plan, and we sent the girls away to get help, while the 3 of us, armed with weapons and now 3 flashlights, went further into the campground looking for our friend. And after the 3 of us watched the red taillights of Mr. Bryson's truck fade out of our sight, we then cautiously began to follow the blood spots all around the campground until they ended at the door of the dining hall, which is where we would find the mutilated body of Barrett that was laid across one of the benches, and only partial of his face was recognizable. And that's when we heard the loud groaning sound of a man coming from outside, and once we looked out of the windows, we would see a shadowy figure walking into the forest. Mr. Bryson was persistent that we followed the figure, but I knew better and had declined to go, so I stayed behind with the body of Barrett, as both Jim and Bryson went off into the woods. And about 20 minutes later, I would begin to hear the sounds of gunfire, and they were followed by screams of agony coming from the forest, which had me feeling uneasy. So I did what I thought was smart, and I ran over to the cabin next to the dining hall and watched out of the window to see if it was Mr. Bryson and Jim that came out of the woods or someone else. And it didn't take long before I seen someone come out holding a flashlight and run towards the dining hall, which told me it was either Jim or Mr. Bryson. So I opened up the window and shouted for them to come over to the cabin I was in, and once they did, I would see that it was Mr. Bryson, who was then soaked in blood from his head to his feet, and his reason why was shocking. Bryson said once Jim and himself went into the woods, they would come across a man wearing a gray hooded jacket, whose back was turned to them. So Jim would slowly walk up and get the man's attention by nudging him with the rifle he had. But it was the biggest mistake Jim could make, because once the gun barrel touched the shoulder of the stranger, he would quickly turn around, revealing himself to be a zombie, before he would grab a hold of Jim, where he would sink his teeth into Jim's flesh, ripping out his throat. And as Mr. Bryson dropped to his knees, he would repeat the words, "I killed him. I killed him," as he began shaking out of fear. I would help him back up to his feet and tell him that it wasn't his fault that Jim was murdered by an undead monster. But what he said to me next was not only shocking, but was a confession of a serial killer. He explained to me that he too worked at this summer camp back in the 80s, where he was just a counselor, and that he was the summer camp serial killer that saw Charlie walking alone late at night and saw an opportunity to torture and kill him, which is what he did after knocking Charlie out with a log while he was walking down a trail in the woods, where he was able to tie him up and brutally execute him. I didn't know what to say or do besides aim my gun at him while demanding him to drop his rifle, which thankfully he did without a fight, as he began crying and begging me not to let Charlie get him. So I would pick up his rifle, strapping it across my right shoulder as I commanded Mr. Bryson to walk out of the cabin and then up the lane towards the main road. But we wouldn't even make it halfway down the lane before we were cut off by Charlie, who would begin running after us like a rabid animal who was covered in the blood of my two friends. So without hesitation, I began running back towards the cabins along with Mr. Bryson, who wasn't quick enough to outrun Charlie, who would catch up with him in no time. And at that moment, the only thing I would hear was the painful screams of Bryson, who in my opinion deserved what he got at the hands of Charlie. As I ran back to the bunkhouse my friends and I were using to bunk down in, it would be there where I would lock the door and hide behind the bunk beds while aiming my gun towards the front door, praying that Charlie didn't come for me as well. But no matter how much I prayed, I would eventually see the outline of a figure appear outside the door's window as the scary groaning started, while the doorknob began twisting, letting me know that the undead legend was now after me. But fortunately for myself, I would hear him walk away moments before hearing vehicles pull up to the bunkhouse, where I would hear the shouts of officers stating their presence. So I laid down both Mr. Bryson's rifle and my handgun and walked out of the cabin with my hands in the air. But thankfully Marlene and Carrie was there with the policemen and helped them identify who I was. And as he approached me, one of the officers would ask me who the man was that walked into the woods as they were pulling up. But the only thing I could utter out was that he killed my friends, due to me still being in shock. The two policemen would search the woods where they seen Charlie go, but wouldn't find him, only the body of Jim that was torn apart and half eaten. And they would even find the bodies of Barrett and Mr. Bryson in similar positions. The rest of that night was a blur for me, I guess because I tried blocking out most of the horrendous things that took place, and for a good reason. And still to this day, I can't believe what I saw, and what happened to my two friends. And I still get scared at night, thinking that Charlie is going to show up in my bedroom and that I will hear that disturbing groaning again, letting me know that I too will be food for a bloodthirsty zombie.